And I'm really excited to be here with all of you. And as Keith said, my name's Kathy Barkdahl. I'm a former member of the NOM board and now a member of we have a little committee that helps to facilitate these presentations that NOM has been doing. And we're very excited to have Harry and Marc join us today for our fall presentation series. Some of these were ones that were going to be at the conference that we couldn't have, so we're really thrilled that we can present it in this way. So first, I would like to present our sponsors for today. If I can get this thing, there we go. And the first is the Catholic Apostolate Center that forms missionary disciples and church leaders using digital resources and formation programs, informational webinars, podcasts, and consulting projects. So please check them out. And also Select International has been one of our sponsors for some time now. And unfortunately, with all the COVID, they had to, I like the way Marty put it the other day, they were kind of in dry dock for a while. And so their next pilgrimage is going to be in 2022. So that gives us all plenty of time to kind of start putting our pennies away and our nickels and dimes, and hopefully some of us will be able to join on that next pilgrimage. But we're really thankful that they are for their ongoing sponsorship. And also Catholic Theological Union, which has been a long time partner with NOM and in Chicago. They're in beautiful Hyde Park and helping to prepare effective leaders for the church. And finally, the Cana Institute that integrates marriage and ministry and using the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius of Loyola. So I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Harry Dudley, who is recently retired from the USCCB, where he was first to hold the role of Assistant Director for Certification for Lay Ministry in the Secretariat of Catholic Education. He's received several awards, most notable for his NOM Spirit of the Conference Award, and he is also a member of NOM's Advocacy Committee. Along with his wife, he's created a consulting company, Ambulus Vobiscum Consulting, which works with nonprofits and churches to develop curriculum, leaders, and formation for service. And also we have Dr. Marc DelMonico, who is currently working for the USCCP as the Director of the Office of Certification for Lay Ministry and Service. And his focus is on promotion, recruitment, formation, certification, and recognition of lay ministers. He holds a PhD from the Catholic University of Idaho, of America. I'm from Idaho. I just have that in my mind. He has served.
I'd like to learn more about the Catholic University of Idaho.
we have no Catholic universities anywhere near us. That's a wishful thinking. He has served NOM in a variety of capacities, including working with us to rectify our ministry standards. He presented at the 2018 Rome Gathering on Formational Best Practices for Laity and works as a consultant in the area of ministry formation. So I'm going to now turn this over to Harry and to Marc, and we're looking forward to a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kathy. And thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to put my screen share up in a minute, but I'll just say it's a pleasure to be part of this wonderful array of, speakers that NOM has had from the erstwhile conference that was going to happen, has turned into this lovely array of monthly webinars, which keep us all, I think, grounded in the midst of all that we're going through. So thanks to NOM, thanks to Keith, to Kathy, to Jamie, who's not on the call, but who helped the other day when we presented, as well as Dr. Marty Jewell. And Harry, it's always a pleasure to work with you. Harry was my immediate predecessor at the Bishops' Conference. And unlike the current political transition you're seeing, our transition went very smoothly because he was very gracious and thoughtful and kind enough to stay on to help me when we started. So that's the kind of person Harry is. I'm glad to be talking and working with him. So
thank you.
And thank you all. I'm going to start, since we had the lovely introductory slide with both of us on there, I'll skip right into the presentation here. I wanted to use this image as a grounding point for as kind of like an opening meditation. Christ in the winepress seemed appropriate to draw this image out, given that we're talking about co-workers in the vineyard of the Lord, the image of the vineyard being very strong biblically. And it ties in here with this not very frequently used image. This is not an icon we see a lot of in church history, but we do see it in certain places in the past, and more recently, actually in the history of Protestant hymnody, is where the image of Christ in the winepress comes up. I was reminded too that particularly in African American hymnody, there's a story about Harriet Tubman, the great abolitionist, who in her treks on the Underground Railroad to bring slaves from slavery to freedom in the North from the South, would use code songs to let people know she was near. She would hide in a tree and sing. And one of the images she would use is this image in one of her songs. She would talk about, the dark and thorny pathway where the sinner goes to God, and how Jesus will go with you because he has trod the winepress before you. So that this image of Christ in the winepress it's an image of the cross. It's an image of Christ literally being pressed with the wine, the grapes underneath, and the little funnel going into the chalice, his blood coming there. And so it's an image of the Paschal mystery as well, and with a very interesting and rich one, which I thought would be good to start with. And I'll offer a little quotation here about sort of interpreting this image, and I'm going to. Oops, I went too far ahead. There we go. From Dr. Chrisman from Loyola University. Perhaps we can mine the church's tradition to discover new ways of viewing and reading this image. As an icon, you read an icon. In the 4th century, Ambrose of Milan likened the church to the mystical winepress. Similarly, Augustine exhorted his congregation to imitate Christ, the first grape, by stepping into the winepress and being ready for the pressing. By being a church gathered around Christ, and which extends through all time and space, the mystical winepress encourages all Christians to become ready for the pressing and to share the gospel with a wearied world that thirsts for the nectar of life. What a beautiful image for us as we're struggling with all the many challenges that we're dealing with today in ministry, which we'll talk about in a minute, but just to feel that connection with Christ and his own journey through the winepress. So use that as an image, a callback during our time together as well. But let's start by hearing from you. Want to use a service here that will require you to take out your cell phones or your tablets. Now, if you happen to be watching on a tablet or on a phone, or you need to use your computer, you can do that too. But it's going to be a place where you can enter responses to questions on your mobile device, and they will appear on the screen that I'm going to display. So you want to go to menti.com, menti.com, and enter the code that's listed there, 1485703. To my colleagues on the hosting the call, this was a different code than what we had the other day. So it's 1485703 is where you want what you want to enter when you go to menti.com. So if you have your phone, you want to get that out. And we're going to ask a couple of questions about your experience of ministry right now, and get some responses from that. So I'm going to flip over from this to my view of Menti. And here again, you can see in the top the website and the code. You don't need to enter spaces for the numbers, just the numbers themselves. The question I want to ask.
We can't see it, Mark. We can't see it.
Oh, you can't see it? Let me try to fix my share here. How's that?
Much better.
There we go.
There we go. Now we're cooking. Good. Question number one is the thing I'm most grateful for in my ministry now. This is the time of Thanksgiving, and it's good to think about that. And as people enter responses, they'll appear in a little word cloud on the screen. So if you're finding that, if you go to menti.com, enter the code, this will be the first question that comes up, and enter those responses there. If you're having difficulty doing that, you can also put them in the chat on Zoom itself.
The first question I have, Mark, is the one thing I am most in need of for my ministry. That came up first. Did anybody?
Yeah, the same thing happened to me too.
Okay, well, let's start there then.
Can we use that for the, oh,
So we'll use that as the first one if that's where people are seeing it, but you can enter that in, and you may have the opportunity to enter the first one as well. So whichever one you see, enter it, and then click next question, and you'll get hopefully get the other one. But you can see some people are putting in real, very very intense specific needs, employment, patience. People are looking for peace or more time. We would think that all of the time we spent in front of screens would give us more time. We have less time, and that's a big deal. Support, gosh, the sense of support we don't have, or feel that we don't have in this moment when we might be more isolated. Several people put creativity because it's appearing larger, which is a sign that people are needing space for creativity. It's great. When we have more people, the list gets bigger and you see more. Sometimes I've done a couple of these where you have hundreds of people responding and it gets really amazing. But this is very amazing too. Encouragement. Okay. Juggling multiple obligations. So finding a way to deal with that. Catechesis. So just something to keep in mind there. Now let's see if people were able to respond to the first question. Ah, there we go. Harry, do you want to do a little bit on this one since we flipped them a little bit?
Sure. The two things I'm most grateful for in my ministry now are, and so far, at least from the answers, people, commitment, faith, mentors, something for which I'm grateful for, thriving, relationships, hunger for sharing, the opportunity, confidence, variety, prayers, and openness. So quite a variety of things, and it seems everyone had that one or two, but none of them stood out as boldly because not too many people repeated this time. But all important things. Here we go. It's still shaping here.
Yep.
People, confidence, keep giving. Here we go. Hunger for, okay. Hunger for sharing, spirit, support, parents. It must be DREs speaking there. But quite a variety of things: collaboration, confidence, commitment. I notice the thing that repeats often is relationships. Colleagues was a big one. Mentors was a big one. And so it tells you what's important to us in ministry are the relationships that we have, which is why we hunger for sharing.
That's right.
In this time.
Well, thank you for participating in that. I hope it was a little exciting to see those come in. We're still getting a few more. It's great.
Oh, yeah.
We'll try to print these out and give them to Naum so that they might be shared perhaps later. But thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Let me flip back over to my other presentation here. There we go. I'll reshare just in case there was an issue.
I think that's what we need to do, yeah.
There we go. So we're back to that. If we can move on from now. Okay.
The tool, I hope you enjoy. Get to know it. It really makes that immediate interaction possible when you do presentations.
It's a nice break from, just seeing a PowerPoint for sure. So just a little bit about what we're hoping to take away from today. Sort of in the first section here, we want to consider where we are. And where we are right now is in a profound time of social trauma in so many ways, which is affecting our ministry. So contextualizing all that we're going to talk about today in light of that. Then sort of the title of the presentation is God's Vintage, talking about coworkers and how we got here and the things that we should, again, be grateful for and that we're building on. And then trying to take this in a more specific rather than a too broad of a view to look at how the influence of coworkers, specifically the Alliance standards and the development of standards for ministry around formation, have helped contribute to aspects of ministry formation over these last 15 years especially. And we're going to take that through the lens of conflict management in ministry, an area that continually comes up in our discussions as lay ministers. So that's the first half. And then, Harry, you can talk us through the second half here.
Sure. We want to build on what new developments have taken place in formation and certification that have built on the co-workers and the work of the Alliance in particular. So we'll see there are expanding existing models. We're going to look at it through the experience of ministry at the margins, specifically prison ministry, but also at how through these developments of these new forms of pastoral care that the parish is beginning to see itself as a community of care and has greater opportunities to become that. And then clearly, we hope that we'll share some thoughts on the ongoing and essential role of NOM in all of this.
And along the way, we're going to hope for some interaction. We'll hopefully do, if we have enough people, we'll do breakout groups, particularly around the conflict literacy. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have time for more questions too. But during the process, we'll invite your feedback through the chat and other ways and look at that too.
Sure.
All right. Let's start where we are, which is in a rough place. We have continued to endure in 2020 just profound, painful impacts in our society and in our ministries, because what happens in our communities and in our society affects our ministries. Whether it's the pandemic or whether it is the issues of racial injustice that have presented themselves piercingly and sort of irrefutably through what we've experienced over the summer months, the political discord, the pain that still, is raw even after this election, which we know is probably not going away anytime soon. Those are all traumatic things. And I made a point in other contexts of saying that right now, every minister is a trauma minister. And that means that they're responding to trauma and experiencing it too. And I think we need to take that seriously. Right now, we're seeing this huge and terrible spike again in the COVID-19. Something to think about is just how we prepare for what may come, possible future, shelters in place or lockdowns might become a reality again. And this time we may hopefully be a little more prepared for it in some sense, but we need to think about what that means now if that happens. So that's just one example. But here are some things that have come up over the course of this year. With the move to online celebrations of Mass and the Eucharist, we've been challenged as a Catholic community that sort of builds its sacramental understanding around physical presence and taste and see, touch and hear, smell. All of that is now flattened into screens. Even in places where we've opened up, we have not seen the return of numbers to parishes, which is in itself a challenge, as presented us today. But we know that that particularly for the sacramental imagination is a big deal. We had a process. We knew what worked in ministry. We did that as best we could. We knew it wasn't perfect, but we knew it. And now we don't know it. And now we don't know, what can work and what can't. We're often struggling to find methods and approaches to ministry now in this online world where we're connected while we're in the midst of this pandemic. And some of it is working, some of it isn't. We're still figuring it out. We don't know how long it's going to go on. We don't know what it means for our ministry long term. That's very disconcerting, and that's very disorienting, and it's traumatic. Somebody put creativity, they need creativity, and it's like, yes, of course. One of the first things that happens when we experience long-term trauma is that we lose the ability to be creative, to think outside of our situation. So we're very, very stunted, right now. That isn't to say that creativity isn't happening, it certainly is, but it's really challenging to put ourselves in that mental frame of mind when we're struggling and often in survival mode. And Harry's going to pick up for
in this instance, sure, with furloughs and job losses for lay ecclesial ministers, all mainly due to the limited resources for those who remain, and certainly a climate of job insecurity. At the same time as we're mainly having these disembodied sacramental celebrations, we see a resurgence of clericalism, because what we see are mainly priests celebrating and very few others involved, as we had become used to. But also the social conflicts intersect with ministry needs, especially with youth and young adults. So they're experiencing this in ways they're worried about their future, as all of us are right now.
Yeah. And you may have others that you are thinking of as well. I mean, share those in the chat. We'll try to loop back around to those. But it's just important to sort of name where we are before we can sort of see our way forward. But let's go back to that image of Christ in the winepress and the image of Dr. Christman. Be like the first grape ready for the pressing, following on Augustine there. We're shocked and surprised and disoriented, and we think we've lost God somehow. That may be some of the spiritual feelings we're dealing with. We don't see where God is in all of this, because it can be hard to do that, especially when we're struggling with trauma. But we feel that, I think, if we take the time to center ourselves in our prayer, in the routine of prayer, we do still hear God's call and inviting us in to go, as he did to the disciples after the resurrection. Go where we don't expect and do what we didn't anticipate we'd be doing, because we're still given a mission. We're still commissioned by Christ to do the gospel. One of the questions we should always ask is as we sort of respond to people in need right now, are there ways that we, our church in general, seeking to protect ourselves or our particular cluster of grapes? We don't want these grapes to be smashed. We want some other grapes to be smashed for the wine. But does God invite something else?
Sure. Do we feel crushed by divisive realities in the church and society? How through this experience can we be the nectar of life? I get excited to see the things that parishes are developing that they would never have thought of before. How do we listen and respond to what God asks of us through others? And finally, God promises to be with us and that it will all work for good in the end. So it isn't yet all good. It isn't the end either. So there's still promise.
Again, these are images sort of drawing on this wonderful image in front of us, but it's, again, there may be other things that you're hearing or reflecting on as you're hearing what we're saying. You share that with us. We want to see
and we'd
that.
be glad to see it in the chat room, yes.
And think too about where lay ministry has come over all these years. Like, we all know that there are many challenges in the work of lay ecclesial ministry, as well as many blessings. So it isn't all yet good. So it isn't the end. And that's, I think, a very hopeful place for us to be. So, co-workers in the Vineyard of the Lord, you know, we're sort of the beneficiaries of this document, and some even on the call were helpful in the production of this document. And I think that it's good to sort of, in light of where we are, where we have been, you know, to think about, how does this document still buoy us? How does it still inform us? Again, we're aware of the challenges that are there for people who maybe don't know it as well as we wish they would, particularly our priests, particularly our bishops. Some do, many more need to know it. It's an opportunity for us to maybe take that document again and in online reading groups or ministry study groups to read it with pastoral teams, to hear what it says anew and afresh. And while you're doing that, get the copy of it in English or Spanish, but then you can also buy a copy of Nalm's very good study guide that came out when Coworkers came out, and is still very, very helpful as a source of asking good questions about the content of Coworkers, especially in a small group setting. So give a plug for the Nalm study guide available on the Nalm website. I'm sure somebody will put a link in the chat for that. But when we look at the heart of preparing people for ministry and ministerial activity in Coworkers, there's so many things we can focus on in Coworkers, but let's zero in on the dimensions of formation: the human, spiritual, intellectual, and pastoral. These four areas, which are paralleled in the program of priestly formation and similarly in the deacon directory for formation. These four areas are such a grounding for the work of preparing people for lay ministry. It's a grounding that Nalm has embraced, that many of the ministry organizations that my office and the subcommittee on certification work with. And it's just how we're able to put together such comprehensive formational preparation for our ministers today. So it's good to keep this four-part dimension in dimensions of formation in mind as we talk about what we want to do, what we want to look at, where we've come from, and then as we talk about the conflict management competencies that we'll talk about today from Dr. Ann Garrido. So in light of that, I just want to point out, again, going back to the title, that there is a lot of work involved in producing wine, and that a lot of that work is reflected in where we have been over these 15 years and in the many decades prior to these 15 years since Coworkers came into existence. And I framed it in terms of these 5 steps related to vineyard work. There's the tending the vines, going back to the image of the grape crushing and fermenting, the pouring and the tasting of the final product, being able to savor and share the wine that is produced with others, and then taking the leftover, the amount that we have and sharing it, exporting it, making it available to others. These 5 steps are kind of like a good way to see a bit of the history, which we're going to go through very quickly here. But I do want to point out again so that we can see where we have been and where we might go. So first, tending the vines and the rooting in our theology and church teaching. This understanding of ministry and what lay ministry has been that has emerged out of Coworkers didn't start with Coworkers. It has a long history in the 20th century of the church. It's going back to the Second Vatican Council and even before it, theologians inviting the laity to see and claim their place in the church. And whether it is you find it in Lumen Gentium or in the decree on the laity at the council, that has come forward in church teaching. And look at all of these different documents, again, only a sampling of documents on the laity and on lay ministry, many of which were, Nalm was integrally involved with. So it's like there's an organizational tie-in to this long history that we should celebrate and be grateful for, that has helped found and ground our work as lay ministers and lay ecclesial ministers. but again, it's 55 years at least, you know, and growing, that we have taken the time to smash the grapes, to allow them to ferment so that they could produce this great vintage, and the flourishing of lay ecclesial ministry in the life of the church. We've been following that model of see, judge, act. We've been looking at the theological realities, the ministerial ones. We have now a generation or two of theologians reflecting on this, on ministry practitioners reflecting on it, and the larger church doing so as well. These are, again, just putting on the screen a couple of just very recent examples, but there's so many more. Even right up to now, the work of Dr. Barbara Sutton and the Collegeville Symposium on the Healthy Ministry Workplace going on right now. These are important conversations that we're still addressing needs, but we're doing so on the basis of all that has gone before and what we continue to mine from coworkers to continue to savor, you know, that vintage. It's just good to see that. Another item, just that I'll mention in passing, is was provided in the link that Jamie and Keith sent out to you for today. A new article by Dr. Zini Fox, who was on the call the other day, on snapshots of ministry at 15 years after coworkers. A really excellent article. It has, you know, I think good news and challenging news in it, which makes it very real and honest. So I encourage you to look at that as another sort of resource on our great history. Pouring and the vintage.
Ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. This is where you take over, Harry.
Right. This is also a process. We're pouring and tasting the vision and enhancing access to formation. The wonderful thing about what coworkers did and all of the documents that led to it, led to also the creation of cooperation between all of these different groups, the Emerging Models Project, the building of intercultural competence for ministers, the Alliance for the Certification has even added new roles, as we'll see shortly. The Association of Graduate Programs in Ministry has really done a lot to enhance the ongoing development and formation in many academic settings across the country.
I'll just add quickly too that AgChem has dedicated both this year's conference, which they were able to get in before the lockdown in February in Tucson, and the one that they hope to have not this coming year but the following year on coworkers, so that they've been engaging sustained theological reflection on how coworkers can continue to be of value and be enhanced.
And FIP is another example. They are really doing wondrous work in Hispanic ministry and enhancing really the whole church through their efforts. Savoring and sharing, supporting formation and resourcing. These are just examples for how over time, as the office came back into the conference, all of these offices have been involved in the ongoing conversation for how to support. First of all, in the development, the Subcommittee on Lay Ministry, the Commission on Certification and Accreditation served for a good 27 years. The Committee on Laity, Marriage, Family Life, and Youth also addressed and led the conversation. The Committee on Cultural Diversity in the Church, the Committee on Evangelization and Catechesis, Clergy, Consecrated Life and Vocations, and now the more recent Subcommittee on Certification for Ecclesial Ministry and Service. And as that was set up, all of these other committees each have chosen representatives to serve to be sure that the wider picture and wider involvement of the bishops is present in the ongoing conversation.
While we're on this slide, I'll just mention as well that there's currently an open survey available in English and Spanish that the USCCB is running, which NALM has promoted as well, and all the other ministry organizations too, on the state of lay ministry in light of the pandemic, in light of where things are. It's very full. It's a very full survey, but hopefully will give us a good snapshot. And the Committee on Laity is really sort of the the ones who are pushing that forward, we're supporting that. And I think if Keith has the links, they can put it in the chat. It's also at the end of the slide. So hopefully you'll have a chance to take that survey if you haven't had a chance to, and share it with others during this time when it's open. And in addition to the USCCB, partly because of the connections with the USCCB, we've been able to build relationships for ministry formation with many dioceses and many organizations. This list here is an example of some of the dioceses as well as some of the organizations that we've worked with. Is this list smaller than it used to be? Yes. Do we wish it was bigger? Of course. There are ways that we can still draw from the list of folks who are approved with certification standards from the USCCB to say there's a lot of good work being done in preparing and supporting lay ministers. We always want more. We always think we can do better. But this is something we should be proud of, and the diversity of the diocese and the organizations as well. And then, of course, the great work of the Alliance, of which NALM is a member, in terms of promoting certification and formation in the various ways that it has done, including in the updating of standards to include new certification competencies and roles, most recently in 2018 when the Alliance submitted their standards for review and approval by the USCCB. So you're going to see some of the new ones there, as well as some of the ones that have endured, for a while now. We're always continuing to say, well, what more can we do to enhance these offerings and enhance people's awareness of the value of that integral formation through those 4 dimensions that we talked about. And these standards that the Alliance has developed has enabled not just the Alliance organizations, but so many others to benefit from that perspective. It has taken coworkers and applied it in a way that has been very, very useful for so many people. And we should be thankful and grateful for that.
To continue our image of exporting the bounty, these are some of the things how the U.S. Lay Ecclesial Ministry has impacted the world church. At the Synod, many pointed to the shortage of qualified people devoted to accompaniment. The Synod also recognized the need to train consecrated persons and lay people to accompany young people. And the charism of listening to the Spirit calls forth within the communities might also receive institutional recognition as a form of ecclesial service. And it was the office, Paul Jarzembowski helped us to be aware of this because of his heavy involvement in a particular synod. In addition, exporting the bounty, we can see it in the call for ministry to be synodal. It should involve journeying together the values that the charism the Spirit bestows in accordance with the vocation and role of each through a process of co-responsibility. So there's this sense that we need to fully accept the contributions of the lay faithful, including young people and women consecrated persons, as well as the many associations, groups, and movements, and how much they've contributed. So clearly, some of this is showing the influence on the universal church of the developments here in the U.S.
And it's a recognition. You can see in some of these terms, these words, just how much the ecclesiology, the rootedness in baptism, and the recognition of engagement of the laity has become a part of the vocabulary of the larger church. And this is co-workers language. This we have, again, a lot to be grateful for in seeing this. Can we do more? Can we always try to build that in a better way and make that more of a real thing? Of course. But it is good to see that we have made an impact, even across the world. So again, bring us back to those 4 dimensions of formation as a way of looking at standards that we've developed over the years. We now want to take it in the direction of looking at how standards might be resourced for conflict management in ministry, for which we're grateful for Dr. Ann Garrido from Aquinas Institute, who has written a wonderful book, Redeeming Conflict, sort of addressing conflict and managing conflict in ministry, which I highly recommend to everybody. She was invited by our subcommittee on certification to reflect on the national certification standards of the Alliance and consider how conflict management skills might be applied within them. And what we're going to show you today is a bit of that, the fruit of that. And there's a handout which gives you a lot more detail than we're going to go into here tonight. But we hope it's a basis for a little bit of a breakout that we're going to do shortly. So let's move on to that.
Now, why would we be addressing conflicts in ministry? Well, obviously, unaddressed conflict is one of the most significant sources of destructive behavior in the life of the church and society. Conflict in the church emerges in the context of power. Obviously, power has to do with a relational, social dynamic in which people exert pressure, whether consciously or unconsciously, to produce a result. So the Catholic Church has a centuries-long history of not being able to address issues of conflict. We tend to be combative. We have had very violent responses. For example, the heresy. Look at the Crusades. Look at the Inquisition. And power. Look at the lay investiture and the medieval ecclesial corruption, right up to the modern clerical sexual abuse issue. So clericalism and budget cuts for lay ministers, all of these are reasons why we have to begin to address the skills we need so that we can face the conflicts as they come.
And from a theological, spiritual point of view, being able to address conflict in the life of the church is to engage in reconciliation, reconciling especially our unity and diversity, to understand what contributes to our unity, what harms it, but also how our diversity is necessary for our unity. And when we do that, we sort of follow in the life of our own triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which we reflect on as sort of being united in identity, but with each person of the Trinity having its mission, which does not, diminish or take away from the mission of the other persons. That's always an ideal. We strive for it. We never achieve it. We're human. We're even the church, which is divine and human. We struggle and we fail at that. But we need to be aware of the fact that this is part of a theological and spiritual effort as well. Conflict in the church and society is not going away. We know that. We know it from our experience. We know it intellectually as well. Simply stating what the church teaching is doesn't necessarily mean it's going to resolve the issue. Saying that this issue is going to be resolved in a certain way does not take away the conflict. And if we admit that, we sort of are on a good path to understanding we need to address this in a different way. And I will say that the part of the reason Dr. Garrido was invited is because our own subcommittee on certification and the bishops have said this is an important area for growth. We need this more. And so they made it a strategic goal. We responded to that by asking Ann to share these things with us, and we want to go into those now.
Sure. One of the key things is recognizing and avoiding patterns of triangulation. And there are so many who avoid direct conversation with those we are in tension with, instead favoring talking about our problems with others and trying to get them on our side. That flourishes in context where people value kindness and where they feel they have little access to official channels for getting things done.
So you can see why this would be a challenge in the church today. Being able to hold different perspectives together in a sense of curiosity, not necessarily agreeing, not necessarily being absorbed into another's point of view that's challenging to ours or even something we find diametrically opposed to ours, but to ask questions to help people help us understand why people think or do what they think or do. And it's part of listening to stories, not just facts. We need the ability to adapt a stance of curiosity, to listen well, to ask illuminating questions, and summarize without judgment. Reading that sentence, any of us, and there are probably many on this call who have background in pastoral counseling and or clinical pastoral education, CPE, who can readily point to the same approach in those dynamics. This is applying those pastoral skills to the conflict situation that we might find ourselves in.
Another critical thing is the ability to distinguish between intent and impact. Now, clearly, if we have a good intention, we think the other person should recognize it and not be angry with us, even if they were impacted negatively. However, if we've been badly impacted by another's action, we generally are certain they intended to hurt us. So as we begin to understand the difference between those, excuse me, we can better address it, because we have to acknowledge both. Whether there was intent or not, there is impact. And we have to be able to understand the difference and acknowledge, first of all, not assume bad will. That's usually a bad place to start.
How do we frame our conflict that we experience in terms of contribution rather than blame? And bear in mind as we're going through these that we're thinking about sort of the day-to-day conflicts that are coming up in our ministries. There may be much more painful, neuralgic, really deep issues as well, which may or may not fit into this. But it's important to say when we face the low-level conflicts well, we're more prepared and more practiced to deal with the really challenging stuff. But here, in terms of contribution rather than blame, when we blame and organizations become focused on blame, we destroy people's morale. We destroy the ability to work collaboratively. And so trying to think about a problem, how do we ask the questions, what can we all contribute to keep this from happening again? What does each of us need to do so that we don't keep getting stuck in the same situation? And again, what each of us does may be different. It's not like any game of equality. They may be slightly different. Some maybe have to do more, some less. But there's something that each of us can do to help influence a better outcome. And to be aware of that is important.
Another critical skill is the ability to integrate Christian practice and ritual around forgiveness and repentance. So from a faith sense, neither of these is a human capacity, but rather a divine capacity. So we know the importance of prayer in this, that God shares with human beings. Conflict formation works in harmony with the human and spiritual formation to develop the capacities for forgiveness and repentance, as well as fostering connections, particularly to the sacraments of penance and Eucharist. But as we all know, until we learn to forgive, it's very difficult to move on.
Thinking of the old adage, the family that prays together stays together. Think about it in terms of colleagues, not just going to mass together or whatever, but really praying together. I think that helps, overcome those places where we get broken down and stuck in our conflicts. And then the last one we're going to focus on, though there are others on the sheet, is how do we hone our skills to develop problem solving that's creative based on meeting interests rather than getting locked into positions. The conversation about conflict is important, being able to name and identify feelings, to be able to walk through contribution rather than blame, to be able to express forgiveness when things are broken down and repentance when needed is all good. But where do we go? How do we get there? What is the next step? Because without the steps to resolve it, the dialogue feels like it's just really painful and pointless because we haven't gotten anywhere. Fortunately, this is not just art. There is science to this, and there is a way that we can look at how to develop frameworks to address conflict. The link I have on this page which is a vital resource for Dr. Garrido and her work. The Harvard Negotiation Project, just a great great for all of us. There's a wonderful site with a lot of information on there, and a lot of it flows from this book that Roger Fisher and William Ury wrote in the 70s, which has been updated many times. Getting to Yes, negotiating agreement without giving in. Again, for your sort of daily conflictual experiences in ministry, there's a lot to be gained from thinking about it in terms of negotiation. Again, it won't solve every issue, but it can help in many issues. So finding ways you can find where you agree, zones of possible agreement, or if all else fails, what's an alternative? How do we still find a way to do this without even figuring if we can come together to form any sort of agreement? These are important things to consider. They give us opportunity to unpack those, in our ministries, in our conferences, in the work that we do. So we've identified 6 sort of steps here, and as you've gone along, maybe you've heard some relevance for your ministry. Maybe you've experienced that conflict directly right now, especially during these traumatic times. I'd like to offer us a chance to break out for about 10 minutes at this point. It'll give us a chance to hear each other and ask one another, how has conflict emerged in your ministry during these times? And looking at what we've just gone through, what has been most helpful that you heard or felt as you looked at these skills to maybe address that? And again, we have the PDF available for your reference. And I hope it's a fruitful conversation and one that you can come back and share a little bit about. So at this point, I'd ask our Keith and Kathy to help us move into those breakout rooms.
So Marc is asking us to just briefly share your experience in the chat while they do a short video.
Yeah, there may be a few words or a phrase or something. And we're gonna, while you're doing that, I'm gonna be able to show a video just again to reconnect us to that vision that co-workers was. I'm gonna, first of all, share my screen here. That's the first thing I should do. And here we go. And it's from Bishop Kikanis, who's the chairman of our subcommittee on certification. And we recorded this in 2019 with a bunch of other folks representing different organizations and dioceses as we talked about certification. But these 2 minutes, I think, are really powerful and special in highlighting the gift of coworkers and the purpose of formation and why it is so important and valuable. So as you're entering your information in the chat, you can listen to Bishop Kikanis here.
When the bishops passed co-workers in the Vineyard, it was a clear statement on their part about the importance of lay ecclesial ministry and the need for the laity to take their place alongside priests and deacons in carrying out the ministries of the church. Not because of a shortage of priests, but because of the call of the baptized to use their gifts not only in the marketplace in changing our culture and society with the gospel values, but also in the context of the church. And I think when bishops made that clear statement about the value and importance of lay ecclesial ministry, it was with the awareness that lay ecclesial ministers, like priests, like deacons, need to be well prepared, need to have the competencies and skills necessary to serve God's people. And certification was one way of assuring the fact that people aren't just going into ministry willy-nilly, but they are going in prepared. They're going in ready to respond to the pastoral needs of the people that they will serve, whether it's in youth ministry, whether it's in hospital ministry, prison ministry, whatever, in the wide range of ministries that exist in the church. The call for certification was an awareness on the bishop's part that as we entrust now the work of the church to lay ecclesial ministers, we want to be assured that they are qualified, capable, and ready to take up that ministry.
It's always good to hear from Bishop Kukanis. He's been such a advocate and champion for lay ministers from the time he was on the subcommittee that helped draft co-workers before then and until now, and I'm always grateful to work with him. So, having heard that, hopefully inspirational point, let's see what people have been focusing on in their chat rooms here, the breakout rooms. Learn to listen with your heart in the midst of all of the social challenges. Wow.
They were talking about COVID fatigue, dealing with the racial divisions, the political stress, which we've got, 69 more days. But learning to listen with our heart, that we are not alone in this, that, collectively we can do this. The value in the distinction between intent and the impact that it causes. Having a bishop and a pastor that are open to collaboration makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. I'd seen earlier that Maureen had put in a thing about how it's important it's hard when people on the side we're in conflict with doesn't share a desire to engage in this way. And I would say that in addition to the book I was showing earlier, Getting to Yes by Fisher and Uri, they also wrote a follow-up book called Getting Past No, which is again a sort of a complimentary book saying, like, what can we do with really intractable conflict. Again, it's another resource we can use. But again, I strongly encourage the people to look at Ann Garrido's book as well, Redeeming Conflict, because it is so easily accessible. She ties in these resources, these ideas into the lives of the saints, invites us to reflect on it, not just intellectually, but in all of the ways that we're invited to do so. But thank you for sharing, and thank you for having such a robust conversation. Always hope we can do more of that, but time marches on, and so must we. So here we go. We're going to change. Oops, let me get off of this page here if I can. There we go. I'm going to talk quickly about where we're seeing what has worked and what needs renewal. So Harry, why don't you start us out?
Sure. The first thing there have been some unequivocal successes, developing and honing the professional standards and competencies for formation by the national organizations. These are still having great impact. The degree program supporting adult learning and professional ministry, they do exist. We wish more of them existed, but they're there. And they have built on what we've learned from these standards. And the enhanced value of professional ministry formation is visible and obvious to everyone involved when it's concretely supported.
So, and correlated to that, we can say there's been partial successes. More diocesan formation programs that have developed competencies have looked to the national standards. Whether or not they have officially been approved by the USCCB or not, there's a lot out there building off of co-workers, building off of the standards. There are places, but we need to do more of it, where dioceses have been able to better publicly affirm and authorize their lay ministers and leadership roles. We know we need to do that better. We have some good examples. The Archdiocese of Chicago, I think, has a wonderful example of that, but there are others as well. Enhancing intercultural competencies, the need for that kind of awareness, that kind of attention to the real details of how you do ministry when you are reaching across cultures, multiple cultures even, in a different ministry settings. It's become very important, very essential to ministry formation today in our diverse church. We do see a need for certification actually increasing in places in professions and ministries where there is a tangible need for it. So in chaplaincy, in prison ministry, and in campus ministry. These are some areas where we do see that need for certification and a very specific credentialing to be significant. We've been continuing to engage theologians, pastoral ministry practitioners, and church leaders, trying to address some of the places where we continue to fall short. And to that point, we can go to this slide here, and we'll break this apart here. We know we need to continue to do more to build the relationship of our organizations and support for lay ministry within the USCCB. So many bishops now have been ordained since co-workers came out. And it just may be something that has not crossed their desk, literally. So the more we can do that, the more we can find ways, whether it's through our offices in the USCCB to give workshops to bishops on this, to sharing these types of videos that we just saw. We keep trying to do that. We want to continue to help find ways to communicate better with pastors and bishops who may be reluctant to support professional ministry in their formation, to help, and also to help pick up the pieces of where we are in light of the devastation that the pandemic has brought to budgets and support of lay ministry. We need to, I think, in some ways push back a little bit on the reliance on volunteers. Not that they're not important, not that they're not significant, because they are all those things, and they are essential to our work as a church. But there is a role for the well-prepared volunteer who might be a leader, and a professional who is also a leader, and those who have taken the time and effort and money and blood, sweat, and tears to build their credentials in the church deserve to be heard and deserve to be recognized.
There certainly is recently, too, a ceding of space in the conversation. I've seen this recently, in fact, raised concern for us in some conversations that the University of Notre Dame was having about the shape of lay ministry. Some seem to shift away from the language of lay ministry or lay ecclesial ministry and speak more broadly of the co-responsibility of all the laity. And we really need to address that. We really need to look at what they're doing with that conversation. There's also tangible support of lay ministries. There is modest at best, tenuous and fragile, made worse by the pandemic. And at the same time, the incredible thing is how many are seeking the formation during the pandemic, since now they have the time they didn't have. But formation needs to continue to develop and change in a very dynamic way. We need to be attentive to how these changes impact those seeking formation, and we'll be sharing some of that shortly.
And so again, to just draw us back to that sort of place we've been returning to each night, each part of the night here is, dimensions of formation, these 4 areas that are integral to thinking about, standards and practices for ministry. Harry's going to take us through now some of the ways in which we're sort of expanding how we do this formation, this integral formation, utilizing the experience in pastoral care and particularly in the prison ministries competencies that are being developed as a basis.
Sure. I have to share that many of these lessons build upon really all this conversation started with the work that the Alliance had done. We looked at those and said, starting with those, how would they differ based upon the context where one was going to serve? So that's what raised this. And what was happening is there was no longer an American Catholic Correctional Association for chaplains. So a coalition was formed in spring 2018 to strengthen and address the expansion and understanding of the importance of advocacy for change, as well as ministry in the jail, and the need to address the broader community that's affected by mass incarceration. So not only prisoners, their victims, correctional staff, the community, those in justice, in work in the courts, all of those are affected by mass incarceration. So we had to look at how can we expand the understanding of these things and the options for formation. So could we move to the next slide here? The NACC, the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, is the certifying agent for Catholic hospital and veterans chaplains. And in 2016, they received a grant from the Rascott Foundation to form what they call the Partners in Pastoral Care Project, which was beginning to look at how in multiple settings, we had 25 different settings represented and organizations, how could we now form a collaborative group to look chaplains, theologians, stakeholders to develop standards specific to pastoral care in the many settings where it's now needed. It was recognized that those settings were quite diverse, that there was many siloed efforts and we needed to work more closely. And we wanted a holistic sense of the pathways of formation. So we looked at, as you can see, the 4 dimensions that we saw in coworkers, the 4 dimensions that are approached in the Alliance and their standards. We looked at that and said, looking at those again, what are the specialized competencies for pastoral care? And in 2018, the National Catholic Prison Ministries Coalition was formed. And this group of chaplains and theologians and stakeholders promote Catholic ministry, as I shared already, to all those affected. The goal is to recruit, train, and support and empower those called, but also focusing on advocacy to create a more just and merciful criminal justice system, closely aligned with the ministry and teaching of the Church and the example of Pope Francis. I invite you to look at our website to see just how much we've done. We wanted to create opportunities to share resources and best practices, to strengthen the Church's mission to advance restorative justice and uphold the dignity of every human person in the correctional process. So in May 2020, actually after being formed, we decided in May of 2020 we needed to become a partner in the Partners in Pastoral Care process. We replaced the old American Catholic Correctional Chaplains Association, and we took their seat, so to speak, in order to continue the conversation. And we started a formation committee, which I serve on, to create training materials and a certification process with NACC as the lead. What I think is unique about the process is that we decided it's a spiral process, so one could enter at any point in the process. But also, if you notice, leadership is on the bottom. They're meant to serve, intensive, and then the foundational people. The foundational is for those who are volunteers, who are interested in becoming involved in pastoral care. It's a 30-hour program. There's an intensive program which we're now developing, which focuses on using a CPE-like process to frame the conversation as candidates are introduced to all of the various aspects of the ministry and get to reflect on their experiences of it, so they understand the broader ministry and how they can serve. And each pathway, obviously the leadership is for those who are full-time professional and who chose to be leaders in a specific aspect. But each one of these pathways clearly define the number of hours, including presentation time, opportunities for exposure to the various ministries, a community of support in the parish or diocese to sustain them and continue to care for them. And that includes, for some, being members in an association. We encourage mentoring because this type of community provides an opportunity for ongoing support in the ministry. And it can help candidates to be aware that there may be other pathways other than what they've experienced that they should consider. I'd like to move to the questions we have. These questions are used in each one of the pathways. Why am I doing this? What's my motivation? Where am I? Who's there? What's the context and where I minister? How do I represent the pastoral care ministry of the Church? You're looking at their identity, presence, to be a presence of the church, and to be empathetic listeners. But what am I doing? The focus, that pastoral presence. But also, what am I doing? And that is in the ministry in the name of the church when we're addressing the ministerial needs of the context we serve. And then finally, how do I navigate the system? How do I, what are the expectations of do's and don'ts I have to be aware of? So, my hope is that from this experience we've had in going through this, we consider how these could be adapted for formation in other ministries, that all the pathways may not be initially professional, but there may be other pathways where someone could have the opportunity to experience learning and success at an earlier stage, which for some may be all they want, and others may realize I could do more and consider later steps. So I just want to share the Partners in Pastoral Care was commended by the Bishops' Committee certification as a resource. We were encouraged to share what we have done far and wide because they could see the benefit it would have for the great needs we have in our country at this time for pastoral care. And what we're hoping is through partnering to promote these pathways. So our dioceses and parishes, we hope, can become greater communities of care, even hubs for offering care at a time like now when our communities most need it. These same pathways are being developed for other settings, Veterans Administration, migrant camps, diverse cultural ministries, and more. What's become clear is that whether one volunteers occasionally, on a regular basis, or as a professional, greater effort is needed to provide consistent, comprehensive, and holistic training in both core competencies and the specialized ones to address where they serve. So if you're interested in getting involved, the handout that I have is one we created that tells who to contact and what we've done so far, as well as a little more of the history. I think Marc and I would like to talk a little about is the ongoing vital role of NOM. And do you want to begin, Marc?
Certainly, and in sort of looking at, as Harry was presenting, thinking again of just how all of the work that has been done just in the area of prison ministry is so much tied in to that, that image of that vintage that we've been talking about of co-workers and of the standards. That there's a lot to be grateful for in the developments that have come through that and continue to help influence us as well. But looking specifically at NALM, NALM has always been essential in its support for those who do ministry. It's the National Association for Lay Ministry and for lay ministers. It has built community among all ministry groups. Many of the other organizations may have a particular focus: pastoral musicians, catechists, youth ministers, etc. NALM is different. Certainly you have some focus areas, but it's always been about drawing together ministers together so that we can share how to do ministry well. NALM has been a consistent and unimpeachable voice as an advocate for lay ministry in the church. So I'd invite you to consider, as members of NALM, how advocacy for lay ministers remains essential to the core of NALM. It continues to be something that is foundational, because it has continued to do that in so many ways. Even recently with the dialogue with the Bishops' Committee on Clergy in relation to the update that we're still waiting for, the Recognitio from Rome on, for the program for priestly formation. Tying priest formation into a better understanding of lay ministry has been something NALM advocated for, and it was well received by those who heard that message. And then NALM has, of course, been a supporter of pastoral care in so many ways. How does it continue to support the work that Harry was speaking about? How can the two groups collaborate together? What insights can NALM take from the partners' work in its own understanding of how to resource ministry formation in the future? And just sort of looking at these three questions and others you might have of the implication for Nalm now and in the future. It's sort of a place we wanted to leave you with questions to think about. Maybe we can chat a little bit about it now as we begin to wrap up, and also respond to other chat comments. But we wanted to put that out there because that's very significant. And so, with that, we'll give an opportunity maybe to have questions. There's a couple of items on the page you can look at here when we're doing that about the ministry survey, which was shared previously in the chat. Please take it, share it, and then as a help to Harry and myself, if you have time and want to take a 2-minute anonymous evaluation of our presentation, we'd welcome your feedback. So maybe somebody else can see the chat because I can't, but if somebody wants to share things or respond to things, now would be a great time.
Right. Mainly, just Maureen mentioned how earlier in your presentation, that 4th bullet about the idea of that the laity, the lay ministry should not be just lumped together with, in just one bulk ministry grouping, but making sure that there's always that identity. And Lisa said that the formation of Catholic school teachers needs to be more than completing a certificate, but making sure that they're actually practicing their faith to be able to evangelize effectively. So we have those. So now, are you going to do the prayer first, or?
Well, I'll just say quickly, both of those are excellent points. The idea that lay ecclesial ministers, because they've been really at the forefront of co-responsibility in the church over the last, 50 years, is really an indication that we're at the forefront of those conversations. And I think that it's important we have that perspective. And then regarding Catholic teachers, that's an area where, our subcommittee is part of the Committee on Catholic Education. It's something we're very attentive to. Even as we speak. So more hopefully to come on those things.
Excuse me.
And
Yeah,
I'd love to see the same kind of formation for teachers that we talked about, like we're doing for pastoral care people, that they really need to have support beyond a certificate. They really need to be looking about how they live the life they're passing on. It's not a matter of another subject, but a way of life.
And that survey that they have is a really good place to put those suggestions for them.
Absolutely. So yes, thank you all for your points. I know we may not have gotten to every single one, but we'll save the chat. We'll look at it and see how we can respond. But thank you again for your attention. Before we close out with some important Nalm announcements, we do want to close with a little prayer, which different ones of us will read. So I'm going to put this back on the screen and invite those who are reading to begin.
So go ahead.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay. So as we bring ourselves into the presence of God, dear Jesus, help us to spread your fragrance everywhere we go. Flood our souls with your spirit and life. Penetrate and possess our whole being so utterly that our lives may only be a radiance of yours.
Shine through us and be so in us that every soul we come in contact with may feel your presence in our souls. Let them look up and see no longer us, but only Jesus.
Stay with us, and then we shall begin to shine as you shine. So to shine as to be a light to others. The light, O Jesus, will be all from you. None of it will be ours. It will be you, shining on others through us.
Let us thus praise you in the way you love best, by shining on those around us. Let us preach you without preaching, not by words, but by example, by the catching force, the sympathetic influence of what we do, the evident fullness of the love our hearts bear for you. Amen.
Amen.
So thank you so much, Harry and Mark. This has been really informational and something that I know that each of us we'll be able to take with us as we go along. So as always, in everything we do in the church, there's always announcements at the end. And we want to encourage you, if you hadn't had a chance yet to donate to our annual fall appeal, to please prayerfully consider, even just a small donation is going to help us get towards our $10,000 goal this year. So whatever you can do, you can go to the website and make your donation. And also, if you know of someone who's not a member yet, to please, we've got some of the most affordable prices out there in any association. So we are hoping that we can get more people to join us. And one last commercial that I have is, and it really ties in well to what we talked about, especially with what's going on with the pandemic and the conflict. On Wednesday, November 18th, so next week, you will be getting an email on this soon. Jeff Andrini is going to be leading a conversation, a listening session to seek to be in solidarity with our colleagues who have been furloughed or let go from ministry entirely due to either the pandemic or maybe some other reasons, and things that are still, that you're still living with. And this is going to be a place where we can share our story in a supportive and an encouraging environment. Also, while discussing ways to stay psychologically healthy during the pandemic, and especially during this time of job loss. So Jeff will be presenting next Wednesday on the 18th at 3 o'clock Eastern time. And then I will do I will be facilitating the conversation Tuesday, December 1st at 7:30 Eastern. So when you get that email, we really hope that you'll be able to join us. So thank you all, and we hope that you all have a good evening and that your weekend is something that with a lot less stress and anxiety as we move forward.
Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone, for being so attentive and engaging tonight. Really great to see all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deacon. Or thank you, Mark, and thank you, Larry.
God bless everyone.